It's kind of one of those hard things to teach because you either have it or you don't. However, it's good to have refreshers because we don't become unethical immediately. It kind of trickles over time. So it's just kind of a good one to retouch on. I'm going to try and blaze through this real quick because it's kind of designed for a post academy. However, uh, you guys are all familiar with ethics and whatnot, so we're just going to kind of touch on the real nitty gritty of it. Our objectives are to identify ethical standards necessary for performing public safety duties, identify elements that lead to misconduct and or corruption, identify elements for enforcing and reporting violations of professional standards among colleagues, and identify pertinent information needed to make appropriate decisions. Everybody can see my PowerPoint, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'll take that as yes. um, Basically, ethics are based on these four principles: values, which are beliefs that a person holds true. For example, in early American history, slavery was acceptable. Our morals are a set of standards that define right from wrong. Principles are universally held, values that never change. For example, it's universally believed that there's a degree of dignity that comes to being human. Slavery, as noted above, violated the principles of human dignity. And then ethics, a code of value which guides our choices and actions and determines purpose and course of our lives. High morals and values and principles are based on a good foundation. As you can see, a general skyscraper has roughly 53 feet of foundation. A dog has 0. The largest skyscraper is I think it's 374 deep. So if you have these strong morals, values, and principles, you will be ethical. And what do you think for law enforcement powers? As far as the form of government's concerned, why we're held to such a higher standard is because we are the most intrusive form of government. And thinking about it from a probation standpoint, a judge is giving you the right to go into these people's homes or whoever they maybe live with and either making an arrest, controlling their rights, kill a person if you need to, seize their property, or we're provided with a ton of information about these people that the public isn't allowed to know, up to and including social security numbers. Uh, However, we find people, I mean, we can tap into a couple of places and get all their credit history for that matter. So we're very intrusive, and that's why we're held to such a higher standard. As you know, we all taken a code of ethics, and they're all the same for the most part because it was adopted by the US in 1960 something. I think it was 63. And then, of course, the IACP, when they adopted it, 68 countries also adopted this. So it's very universal. And we take it very, very seriously because of the intrusive nature of our job. And based on that, we have to have these 6 pillars of character. We have to be trustworthy. We have to be respectful. And treating people with respect means letting them know they're important and worthy simply because they're human beings. And not just that, if you think about it, we all have our own personal biases, but that doesn't allow us to, because we have a personal bias against their lifestyle, that doesn't mean we don't treat them with respect because they are a human being. We're responsible and we have to be accountable for our decisions and everything else that we do within the confines of our authority. Justice and fairness. So we need to be concerned with our actions. We have to follow the proper processes and the consequences that are morally right, honorable, and equitable. We need to be caring. I kind of think that goes with respect as well. We need to be compassionate, empathetic, kind, and charitable. And civic virtue and citizenship, duties, rights, conduct and responsibilities of a citizen, respecting authority and the law beyond my own self-interest. Basically, for me, that means doing the right thing for the right reasons at the right time. I'm not sure. Hang on. This was a little different. I apologize. So you have the Wattenberg Amendment, which is the domestic violence offender gun ban. So during the 104th session of the United States Congress, Senator Frank Wattenberg from New Jersey sponsored what would be named the Domestic Violence Offender Gun Ban, or the Wattenberg Amendment. The Lautenberg Law, more commonly known as the Lautenberg Amendment to the Gun Control Act of 1968, establishes a regulatory scheme designed to prevent the use of firearms in domestic violence offenses. More specifically, the Lautenberg Law makes it illegal for any person who have been convicted of certain misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence to ship, receive, or possess firearms or ammunition affecting interstate commerce. This means that the Lautenberg Law imposes a life ban on firearm possession following a qualifying misdemeanor conviction. Lautenberg Law is controversial for two major reasons. First, prohibitions relating to domestic violence offenses apply to misdemeanor crimes. More typically, prohibitions of this kind have been applied only to felony offenses. Second, the Lautenberg Law is controversial because it does not include a government exception for law enforcement and military personnel. Therefore, under the Lautenberg Law, military personnel and law enforcement officials, such as police, are prohibited from carrying firearms if they are convicted of certain misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence. Under this law, police officers and members of the military must turn in their firearms when the law is applied to them. And that doesn't just mean just a domestic violence conviction. If it's domestic violence related, even if you plead guilty to the lesser crime of disturbing the peace, you still lose your gun rights. So that was kind of a big deal as far as law enforcement is concerned, because you lose all those rights. And how can you go out and enforce the law without a gun? And the family law license. So if you're in violation of child support orders, subpoenas, and paternity and child support cases, orders for visitation with minor children, the following can be suspended: driver's license, recreational license, and occupational license. And your passports can also be denied. That also affects us as well. If you fail to pay your child support, if you can't drive, how are you going to be able to do your job? And we'll just get into the nitty gritty of what leads to misconduct, because as I touched on earlier, we don't start out to be unethical, but it's kind of a trickle effect. So there's several contributing factors. You have anger, lust, greed, and peer pressure. And just think in your mind how anger can affect our judgment, especially over time. Say you've been a cop as long as I have. Sometimes you get a little angry with how the public's acting. Now, if I were a lesser person, I would give in to that anger and just do things that I'm not supposed to be doing. Feels like the ultimate act of retribution to think of all the good I could be doing by taking out the people that are murderous or hateful. So does it say that ends justify the means? Lust is the reason, and greed, the reason for increasing in high profile corruption cases within the rank of law enforcement are not difficult to identify. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Rampart or if you've seen the movie, but it's based on a true story where they just started taking money from drug dealers, stealing their drugs, murdering people for their drugs, robbing them of their drugs or their money. And it became a peer pressure situation as well, because they see their commander, their sergeants doing this. And if they weren't going to be accepted in the group. And so a good team of them went down for this and were charged federally. And most of them are still in custody. And same with peer pressure also continues with, like, if you see your buddy doing a bad thing and you're not stepping in, to pull them by the back of the belt or having that conversation with them, you're just as bad as they are, just because you want to be accepted with the group. And over the course of my career, I've seen that get a lot of people. And like you said, it happens after 12 years. It's like, no one will notice if I do this. And then pretty soon it's justified and they just continue to do it. Then they get caught. An officer is guilty of misconduct or corruption and abuse of power incidents will not get leniencies. Of course, they're saying they were led by their peers, and I didn't know is not a defense. And then we can develop bad habits that lead to poor judgment. Even just physically fitness, we have a tendency to kind of develop bad habits, just not gotten involved in a fight or not going to the hot call and getting out of the car and running after the bad guy because we've developed bad habits. And that's poor judgment because we're not keeping the public's betterment in mind when we do that. And corrosive conditions and temptations can never be used as an excuse. The best way to stay out of trouble is to follow the rules of the organization. Two of the truths about organizations are that they don't like to be embarrassed and they use rules to protect themselves. There's a noble cause corruption. Do the ends justify the means? Noble cause corruption is an ends-oriented approach to an ethical dilemma that, say, law enforcement professionals will utilize unethical and sometimes illegal means to obtain a desired result. If your actions are inherently bad, then it doesn't matter what the outcome is. Your conduct is ethically wrong or being corrupt for the greater good. Means justify the ends. If your actions are inherently good, then it doesn't matter what the outcome is. Your conduct is ethically sound. So kind of like, was it Training Day, where he says sometimes you got to be the bad guy to beat the bad guy? Not a good defense. Here's some examples: lying on a report, false testimony in court, planting evidence, or embellishing reasonable suspicion. Lying on a report is also leaving exculpatory out of your report too. So if you have some information that doesn't shine so brightly on your suspect because the wife is also not always a good person and she has her own issues, like say she has marijuana on her as well, but she's telling you things about the suspect as well, you still need to disclose that in court. Otherwise, that's considered lying. After arresting a suspect for possession of marijuana, you weigh the drugs and notice the amount. It's just under the amount for the limit for a felony. In order to ensure the suspect is convicted of a felony, you add marijuana from another case, creating a felony amount. So it's not a good idea. So to avoid this, you're just going to follow our policy and procedures, of course, our laws and case law as well. And always act professionally. Sometimes it sounds simple, but I know from personal experience, it's not always easy to do. As a supervisor, I prefer direct confrontation first. So if you see something, say something and not just say something to the person you see violating any of our policy and procedures or doing something that looks like it's going down a dark and dirty road. And then I would refer to my policy and procedures. And then if that never really amounts to anything or you don't rectify the situation, then you follow your chain of command and report. Now, if it's super egregious or something of that nature, sometimes that dictates what you do, and you're going to go directly to your chain of command because we don't want a bad situation getting worse. And they can be mad at you all they want. However, in the same aspect, you got to cover your butt too. And here's a perfect example. Officer Johnson completes their first DUI arrest during first phase of FTO. During the arrest, Johnson's FTO becomes frustrated at the suspect and sprays him while he's handcuffed. After they process him, the FTO tells him not to report that in his report that they OC'd him while he's in handcuffs. The FTO explains that the OC had nothing to do with the DUI arrest and would only muddy the waters of the case, which is not true. Officer Johnson knows this order is not ethical, so he confronts his FTO and explains their concerns regarding the order. When the FTO persists, Johnson identifies the policy and procedures and kind of presents that to him. The FTO again persists, and Johnson is forced to utilize the chain of command and approaches the sergeant with a dilemma. He used all of the agency tools and tried to to ensure the correct decision was made. Ultimately, I'm sure he ended up putting it in his report. We're not going to do any breakouts just in the interest of time, but just in the future, just kind of think about looking at your policies throughout the day or whatever. Is it an ethics policy? And I would almost argue with you that almost all of our policies directly relate to ethics in some form or fashion. And this is where ethics really comes down is our decision making. And the more information we have, the better decisions we make. But sometimes we have to make them in microseconds. Sometimes we have few minutes, and other times we have months when we have a long drawn out case or a really long caseload of somebody that's been on your caseload for quite some time. But the ultimate goal is you need to understand all the facts, and then you need to consider a variety of solutions. It's not a one size fits all kind of situation for a lot of things. And I think that's kind of a good thing because it helps you make better decisions in the future as well. And then identify the consequences of each option, because the decisions we make don't just affect just that individual, but it affects everything within the agency, whether it's you guys, the jail, the prosecutor's office, law enforcement, whether they take them to jail, impacts the jail. And it also impacts the target's families and income. So that's why it's so important to understand all the facts and consider all the different solutions. And don't be afraid to seek advice from the people that you respect and that you hold in high regard. Because there's a lot of times where we encounter things that we may have not, and we have a tendency to have tunnel vision, and they might have a better idea than we do as far as solutions are concerned. And in these decisions, there's two different types of decisions. So type 1 are the easy decisions are instant and automatic. So like say I was throwing a ball at your head, would you either flinch or catch it? But if you think about it from when you're teaching your child,
clock and no one has yet. Someone can.
What's that?
I think it was just a mute error.
Okay. So a lot of these decisions, but when they're a toddler, you're teaching them how to catch, they're usually going to catch that ball with their face. So for a child, that's going to be a type 2 decision where they're thoughtful and deliberate, and they require considerable thought and consideration. Or just think in firearms training, the first time you do a magazine exchange, that's a type 2 decision to make. However, as you practice and you do it more often, now it's muscle memory to you, and now it's become a type 1 decision. So here's just a couple examples. Like I have a hard time answering 2+2 most of the time, but I have to whip out my phone. Or just when you hear a loud sound, your head snaps to where the source of the sound is, or when someone's angry. And then your more complex ones is filling out your tax forms or looking for a Q-tip in the crowd, or walking at a faster speed that's natural for you. Just thinking of just different types of decision making. I'm really rambling right now. So as we become more proficient, like I said, type 2 becomes type 1. And that's the same as far as ethical. Once you have that solid foundation, those decisions are super easy for you to make. There's the consequences of corruption. When you get criminal action, the biggest one for me as a cop for as long as I have been is the loss of the public support. Because if you think about it from a standpoint of when you're in high school, do you have one bad teacher, but you have other good teachers. Public doesn't automatically assume that all teachers are bad, but it's completely different when it's somebody in a law enforcement capacity when one of them screws something up. Now all law enforcement's corrupt and they're bad and they only care about laying the hammer to everybody. Perfect. And how often do you see when somebody gets arrested for domestic that it says former high school teacher? But if you were a cop, you were either retired or fired previously. It's always former deputy was arrested for these kind of heinous crimes. So it just sticks with you forever, and it takes us a long time to get that public support back. And then potentially we could be losing funding, and we could probably, as far as the Ada County Sheriff, we could potentially lose the sheriff if we lost public trust. I'm going to go through like 3 different things that were really, really bad and what their consequences were. So you have Rachel Jackson, which was a false arrest. Chicago police officers arrested Jackson after she pulled another officer from a burning car after a crash. Officers accused Jackson of stealing the officer's firearm. Officers coerced Jackson into signing a statement. She remained in jail until a judge dismissed her case 10 months later. Jackson sued the police department for false arrest, malicious prosecution, and coercive questioning. She received $7.7 million award. So that's going to piss off a department because they just lost their COLAs for the next 14 years. And also those officers will eventually be arrested and charged as well. There's another one about a New York woman was raped and sexually assaulted. She was violently raped and assaulted by New York City police officers. They arrested her on drug charges and possession of marijuana. They threatened her with criminal charges if she reported the crimes. However, she did report, and the officers were charged with kidnapping, coercion, and sex crimes. So not only were they charged and serving sentences, they ended up, I think that one was like 14.4 million. I'm not sure why it's not on the slide, but I think it was 14.4 million. They ended up paying her. So that was a big deal too. And they lost public trust over all of that as well. And then Walter Scott planting evidence and lying on police reports. He shot and killed a guy in North Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. He pulled Scott over for a broken taillight. Video shows that Scott was running away from the officers when he was shot in the back. Officer claims Scott struggled for the officer's taser, and the officer shot him because he feared for his life. However, the video shows that the officer made up the story because he walked to the body and placed the taser on the ground next to Scott. We never got the whole story on that and how much they ended up paying the family, but I'm sure it was quite a bit of money. I don't even know why he went to that extent. So this one leaves the brain questioning on a regular basis. And we're not going to do this one either. And I flew through that a little bit faster. So I'm going to open the floor for a bunch of questions if I can figure out how to get out of this screen. How do I do this, Carrie? Help me.
Are you trying to stop sharing?
Yep.
If you hover down at the bottom, you should see the stop share button.
Okay. Hovering. No. Not. Let's
Down at
see.
the bottom of the Zoom screen.
There
There
we
you
go.
There you
Hey, I got it. I'm sorry I flew through that so fast and it's a super dry topic. It really is. But just giving you guys a few of the examples that I've been provided, and I can share thousands of them from over the course of my career, pitfalls. But ultimately, what I find that is the major pitfall is when you see something and you don't step in, that's where you really kind of get in a jam. You cave to that peer pressure, or you don't want to have that crucial conversation with somebody, is ultimately making you deliberately indifferent. And that is the major pitfall.
Nicole, do you have any specific examples of like incidents where you either, generically saw something go wrong or where someone did something right and stepped in?
Yeah. Well, I've done both. And I've also been pulled out of a situation where when you let your anger get the better of you and you let them kind of take you down a road, and for some reason that one person's just getting your goad. I've had guys where I'm just starting to red line. I've had guys pull me by the belt and said, "You're done. You come over here and I'll take over." And it's the best thing to do for anyone. I've done the same where they've redlined for not really no reason, whether they're having a bad day or every contact that they've made for that day that they've just encountered nothing but an asshole, for lack of better terms, and they just peg. So the best bet is to pull them by the belt. They might be upset with you at first, but then afterwards they thank you, and then you have a conversation. Why did that person get under your skin so bad? And that's the biggest one, is if we're not pulling them by that belt sometimes, because I'm not saying that it doesn't happen to all of us. It's happened to me. However, fortunately, I had a good battle buddy that just pulled me out and says, "You're done. I'm going to take over."
I'm curious if anybody who's on the call has an example of a situation similar, like an ethical situation where it was a hard call, or of somebody that maybe made the wrong call. Like I'm curious as to what people's experiences are in probation. We have no problems. That's fantastic.
You guys are amazing. I just thought of an example and it went. I don't know where it went.
I don't think I've ever had anything happen in our office, but I mean, there's certainly been news about like the Idaho Department of Corrections felony officer that got arrested. Other states have had other officers who've been arrested for various, inappropriate behaviors with their clients and stuff like that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and you see that here as well. You don't, and a lot of those officers, if you think about it, a lot of them, like I was saying before, they're 10, 12 years on. And if you think about it from a big standpoint, is we start to get angry because we're dealing with 10% of the population. And so now we automatically think everybody's inherently bad. Just like as a cop, this is always the joke when you think of a priest, you always say child molester. And that's just because that's what's on the news. Well, they're not all that way. However, we just kind of lump them in that group. And my whole goal as cops is I don't want to be lumped in the group with the bad cops. However, it inherently happens, but we're also victims of it as well because we're surrounded by and what we're dealing with is just 10% of the population.
Yeah, I think here in Ada County, I mean, the sheriff's office took over the contract many, many years ago, but we still to this day hear about the previous contract owner for Ada County probation and have
I
to deal
remember
with
that
that.
well.
Yeah. Even though we had nothing to do with it, we
You
still
had nothing to do with it, and that's why we took it over. However, yes, I'm sure you do hear all about the mandatory monies and everything else that
yeah.
was kind of going wrong.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
So I did have an experience with another deputy where we had an inmate that was not playing well and was bowling up against us. And I had to run around the booking and tap him on the shoulder and tell him to let him go because he was still attached to the booking counter
Mm-hmm.
before things went real bad.
Yeah, and that's perfect. Did it snap him out of his little condition
Yes.
of black? Perfect.
Yes.
Yep, and that's the best thing we can happen. That's a perfect example of just jumping in when it needs to happen. Did he have a conversation with you afterwards or?
Yes, ma'am. And he did thank me. I don't know what was going on prior that this really set him off,
Mm-hmm.
but he did come back later and thank me.
Good. I'm glad.
'Cause he-
Good. Good boy.
He was he was like a huge deputy, and holy cow, he could have just ripped that guy's shoulder completely off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, WWE come into my head.
You're like, back it down a notch, brother. I understand.
Oh my stars.
Perfect. Yeah, no, those are perfect examples. And my favorite was when you're directing traffic. I don't know what it is, but that's what makes you see red because people drive like morons, even though we have bright, flashy lights. And I watched one guy rip this guy out of a car, and I got in there just in time before he went too far. And I thought he was going to swing on me. He was super upset with me, but afterwards he did come back and say, "Thank you so much. I'm sorry I got angry with you." I'm like, "Yeah, you were seeing red, bro." So, no, those are perfect examples. And that's generally what I see for the most part. You know, we've had a lot of weird shit that's happened in the past as well. However, most of it is just because sometimes our emotions get the better of us and we need to be able to ramp it back down when we need, once we have control.
Well, and something you said, Nicole, is so very true about like a lot of times we don't find ourselves in hot water just all at once. It's little decisions. It's like inch by inch, it's a cinch, yard by yard, it's hard. That saying always sticks with me, like because it's not like even people on our caseloads, it's not like they woke up one day and like I'm going to be addicted to meth. It was little decisions over time that led them to be in front of us. But the same goes for us. And I think a lot of this requires a lot of self-awareness, knowing what our own triggers are, knowing our own personal maybe vulnerabilities where we can be tempted or led astray, and moving our boundaries just a little bit and then the next day a little bit more, and before you know it you're in this situation that you're like, how the hell did I get here? And you know, and it didn't happen overnight. It's these little decisions and moving that boundary just a little bit, cutting this corner, and it's easy to look at someone else and go, oh my gosh, they're so bad, how did they get there? But it really can happen to all of us. And so we need to not be complacent with that and really recognize our own decisions every day.
For sure. Yeah. Emotional intelligence is huge on that. And as I always use, forgive my language, but the asshole in the bar adage, you know, you go into one bar, everybody in that bar is an asshole. You go in the next bar and everybody in that bar is an asshole. At some point, you got to realize you're the asshole and fix it. So ultimately that's what ethics does. Just like you said, you've got to have the emotional intelligence and go, how did it get this far, and how do I have to stop cold turkey?
I was thinking about the relationship that you all have with individuals on your caseloads and how sometimes that could present its own ethical situations. You know, you're there as a helper, but also to hold people accountable, which is sometimes a very difficult road to walk. And I wonder if anybody's, I don't know, struggled with one of those boundaries. Not necessarily a sexual relationship, but just the boundary between you and the client when you've been working with them for a long time. It's easy sometimes to blur. And I think it can be really easy for people to step over the line in the name of trying to help, or sometimes even the opposite direction of trying to be too tough and too heavy-handed that you're not doing the right thing by the client, by the probationer.
Hi, Sandy and Nicole. I would just share that that particular scenario is even more complicated for those of us that do probation in very small communities, where it is very difficult sometimes to separate your relationships outside of the office with your relationship with people in your office. In my world, the same guy that did the drywall at my house may be on probation for a DUI. And because there's two of us in the office, we don't always have the opportunity or the ability to assign another agent, another probation officer to take care of the case. So it creates some additional challenges in making sure that any conflict of is addressed up front, with making sure my prosecutor knows that we have this issue. We can supervise, but I want everyone to know up front what the conflict could be. And sometimes it does make it hard to keep that boundary and not allow conversations to kind of move into a more personal realm when you're meeting with a client who you have had that relationship, or you've had a relationship with a family member. And I think that's probably at least what I've seen in 30 years of doing juvenile and adult probation in a small community and a small county. Is that's probably the biggest ethical challenge I've found for my probation officers and for myself.
Probably really important to be talking about that, like you just described, making sure everybody's aware of the relationship and talking with your team, small team, about what's going on and stuff, to just kind of keep everything in the open makes it a little bit more clear, I think.
I would also echo what Nadine says, and I would add that a lot of times in rural communities, I probably know more things than I should, just because of all the different roles. And the hardest part has been when I know something, but I can't correct someone else. I can't come to people's defense. I can't stop that rumor mill because stuff's confidential. And that's been the most difficult thing, to stand by and, watch people get bombarded with, with the public perception being negative, when I could just step in and be like, you know what, this is, the truth. That's been the most difficult thing for me.
I appreciate everyone who shared. Is there any questions that anyone has, or anything else? Well, Nicole, it seems like there's no more questions, so I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming and teaching us today, and thank you everyone who showed up to listen. It's always a great reminder. This topic, although it is dry, it is super important to revisit and to think about, and to always be checking ourselves. To make sure that we're making good decisions and we're not making those little decisions that are taking us from the path we want to be on. So
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time and sticking with me on such a dry topic, but an important one.
Thank you,
Awesome.
everybody.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
You bet. Have a good one, lady.
Yeah, you too.